Okay, welcome back, everybody. State lands for housing development. I think that's where we are. So first, Kelly, are you up?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'm on Zoom.
Okay, please proceed.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Kelly Lower, LSO, presenting the research memorandum, State Trust Lands Affordable Housing, as well as some comments shared by OSLI. So this memo details the authority, responsibility, and methods by which the Board of Land Commissioners manages the 3.5+ million surface and 3.9 million subsurface acres of state trust lands.
So Kelly, before you go on, your voice is a little scratchy or it's not quite coming in clear.
Let me try increasing my input. 1 second, Mr. Chairman.
She was helping Eli. I think Eli's thing got infected.
Is this any better?
A little bit.
Okay, well, I can undo my headphones. You just might hear a screaming puppy occasionally.
We like puppies.
Okay.
Is that better, Mr. Chairman?
That's much better.
Okay, perfect. So as I was saying, this research memorandum details the authority, responsibility, and methods by which the Board of Land Commissioners controls and manages the 3.5 million surface and 3.9 million subsurface acres of state lands granted to the state by the Act of Admission. The board is constitutionally obligated to manage the lands so as to achieve the highest possible proceeds for the land. And additionally, the legislature has the authority to enact legislation to manage manage activities that contribute to that the management of the board, such as laws for the sale, disposal, leasing, and care of the state trust lands. As far as the management of state trust lands as it relates to affordable housing, there could be a few ways that could go forward. There could be sales, acquisitions, exchanges, or leasings of state trust lands. In the memo on page 2 at the bottom, state land exchanges and sales are outlined. Several management principles guide exchanges, such as whether an exchange is needed for the improved manageability of lands, to meet the need of a community, or if an exchange would provide a long-term benefit to the state trust beneficiaries. And sales must be conducted at a public auction to the highest, and the land sold to the highest bidder. Leases are another option to pursue affordable housing, with the most appropriate form of lease under current law being a special use lease. These leases have a maximum term of 75 years and may be issued for commercial, industrial, or recreational purposes. Notably, commercial purpose is not defined and may require some refining regarding the board's authority to lease lands for affordable housing development. Additionally, OSLI has noted that banks, when financing long-term improvements such as housing, generally require longevity when the real property is not owned by the builder and there's an underlying lease involved. Therefore, amending statutes on the special use lease to allow for a lease term of up to 99 years might be another consideration. On the bottom of page 3 through page 4, there are several states, Western states, that have enacted some sort of affordable housing endeavors with their state lands, or private-public partnerships involving funds that then are used to build affordable housing on state trust lands. These efforts, as I said, include creating private-public partnerships, as well as perhaps identifying suitable lands say near municipal areas that could be used for affordable housing development, or creating perhaps some infrastructure improvements with the use of state lands. And with that, Mr. Chairman, if there are any questions, I'm happy to take some.
Questions for Kelly? Go ahead. Senator Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one question that I had, and I probably should have looked this up, but Kelly, do you have any idea if it's possible to either lease or buy just a portion of a state land section? Or do they have to, does someone have to, if they're going to bid, they have to bid for the whole section? Or do you have any idea on that?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Schuler, I would defer to OSLI on the particulars of that, but I know at least with the 390 parcel in Teton County, tracts of land on that parcel have been leased out to different leaseholders or temporary permit holders, temporary use permit holders. So that's as much as I know on that subject, but I'm sure OSLI could clarify on that point, especially regarding a sale and whether a sale could happen on a smaller piece of land than an entire parcel.
Further questions for Kelly? Okay. Jason, are you going to come up? Is that the plan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Jason Crowder. I'm the Deputy Director for the Office of State Lands and Investments. I'm happy to answer any questions that the committee has as far as current ability to develop affordable housing on state lands. I'm also happy to make any comments to the draft legislation that we see online, but happy to take your direction on wherever you'd like to go first.
So if you will, just generally outline what the possibilities are under current law in terms of kind of just a little bit deeper dive than what Kelly just talked about, and timeframes involved and what you have to go through in order to facilitate any type of a lease or purchase or swap.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I think it's important to say right off the bat, we feel like we do have the ability to lease for housing now. We have houses, we have cabins, we have people living on state land currently under a variety of different authorizations. Some are special use leases, some are temporary use permits for short-term duration type activities, and others are under grazing leases. We have farmsteads that are on state lands, and so people are living there. So we do, under current statute, have the ability, obviously, to lease for residential purposes. Where we run into limitations for large-scale type developments is in, like Kelly mentioned, the length of term of a lease and how financing can be secured with that. And so we've spoken with the legislature for many years on increasing that limitation from 75 years to 99 years to open up some financing opportunities. It's also important to note that with that, that doesn't mean every lease, every commercial lease goes to 99 years for term. The Board of Land Commissioners has further limited that down through their rules and regulations to the economic life of the improvement. So the majority of our commercial leases, including those with residential components, are at 35, maybe 40 years in length. And then we renew them, review them, and renew them at that point. But 99 years is a very key component for those that we've spoken to in the lending world. And the other major limitation and why we don't have large development for residential buildings on state lands is the improvements themselves. The way the statutes are written and have been written in the past is that the builder or the owner of those improvements could only be compensated up to a certain amount for what they built on there if the land was sold with the improvements. And in the past, that was just the contributory value. The contributory value is a very difficult thing to value to define. It's essentially what is the value of that improvement to the lease, and even our appraisers struggled with what that was. However, the legislature did come in a couple years ago and further define that, but focused mainly on grazing improvements and not on commercial improvements. And what they did is they made a change that said any improvement made on the land owned by another could be compensated to bought by another could be compensated back to the owner the current market value. And they further define the current market value as the replacement value when the lease was transitioned or when the land was sold. Now, when you're selling a house on the open market, the replacement value is not what you want to sell that house for. You want to sell it for the market value. So we do have some language we can offer the committee and anybody else who wants to further that effort to really focus on what the true value of that improvement is to be sold. But that's one of the major limitations for people coming and creating these developments on state lands, because if that land is ultimately to be sold with the improvement on it, they're going to be limited by what they can get in return. And so the light at the tunnel becomes very small. Mr. Chairman, you spoke about length of time for doing land sales, exchanges, and acquisitions, and all of that varies based on the parcel, obviously, based on the complexity, where we are, how many parties we're dealing with, what type of property it is. Typically, we can do a very simple one within 6 months, complete any of those types of transactions within 6 months. However, we have had some more complex ones reach years, a couple, 2 or 3 years to actually get completed. Now, that said, we operate our real estate program not on a first come, first served basis, but what has the best impact, the greatest impact to the trust beneficiaries. And we put those in highest priority and we work on those first. So some of the timing delays is because certain transactions may fall in priority and we just don't have the capacity to review them going forward. I think we are primed, we're ready, we have the existing statutes in-house to move on any real estate type transaction that would further an affordable housing effort to whatever degree that needed to be done. We've talked with communities like the city of Cheyenne to offer lands that are adjacent to their municipality for development, understand what that structure might look like. We've offered to serve as a land bank for them, to acquire a piece of property and hold it until they were ready to move on it. We've offered an exchange scenario with some of the lands either in Laramie County or elsewhere in the state to help with a value for value situation. But really, with the existing statutes from a real estate perspective, there's not a lot that the legislature needs to do for us to be able to move forward in that effort. Mr. Chairman, I went through a variety of different things there. Please focus me a little better.
Well, so how often have you actually done an exchange or a land swap or with, say, a community like town, city of Cheyenne or other places? So you say you have the ability to do it, but does it happen?
Mr. Chairman, for affordable housing, it does not. We've done some transactions for landfills, made sure that certain counties had ownership of land for landfills. But for affordable housing, that hasn't happened. And the reasons in statute, like I mentioned, the limitations for improvement, valuation, the length of term for financing are a couple of hurdles. But also the Board of Land Commissioners oversees the management of these lands, and there hasn't been a great appetite to move forward in that. They feel or have felt in the past that that's more suited for private industry to understand how development could occur and where it should occur and to let them do that. What we've done to further that effort is simply exchange out of it, allow a private developer to buy it and then develop it later. And what I like to call that is riding the appreciation curve. So we'll sell a piece of property that's ready for development to a private individual. They do all the work and they receive all the benefit. Or we'll exchange with them into something that's just a little bit further out of town and wait for town to grow into it and let that appreciation rise in that parcel as we go.
Mr. Chairman. Go ahead. Oh, thank you. Hi, Jason. Can you give me an example of one of those that you've done in the last couple of years where you sold a property to a developer or done any of the things that you just described?
Sure, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chair. I think a good example, and it hasn't fully reached fruition yet, these things take time. And we've actually denied a couple because of the lack of benefit to the beneficiaries compared to the benefit to the private developer. But City of Cheyenne or around the City of Cheyenne is a great example. We had a parcel just south of LCCC, up on the bluff there, that was ready for development, and that area is currently being developed. Houses are being put in that area, and we got an equal amount of acreage, certainly a value for value amount of acreage on, if you're familiar, the Chalk Bluffs Road, which is south of Cheyenne. We disposed of property that was going to be developed, had plans to be developed, but had no access to it. There were no current roads. And what we got was lands that could be developed in the future with adjacency to that county road with power infrastructure and everything available to develop in the future when it reached that point.
So I'm a little confused, because what I heard you say is you don't feel that there's any statutory change necessary right now for you to do what you just described, and you've done it. So, but then I also kind of heard you say you think there are some things that could be changed in statute that would help that with the affordable housing or whatever. Are there things in this piece of legend, and we'll go through it, but I'm just confused a little bit about,
Sure.
do we need it or don't we need it?
Thanks for the question, Mr. Chairman. To clarify, we have the ability to do real estate transactions. And if that helps further an affordable housing effort, great. If we're going to do it and retain ownership and then at some point sell the property, we need some adjustments to statute to be able to do that.
So further questions for Jason?
And Mr. Chairman, to Senator Schuler's question, we don't have to sell a parcel by parcel. It could be any variety of size within that parcel. But we do review each application if it is, well, all of them. But we want to make sure we're not creating a donut hole or a weird ownership pattern or something like that. But we can do anything.
So, Jason, with my conversations with the mayor in Cheyenne, he was looking at potential land swaps. So I'm just curious if how far down the road have you had those discussions with anybody? And particularly, he was looking at low-income housing and/or affordable housing.
Mr. Chairman, we've attended a few meetings. They have a task force in that area. We've attended those as participants, not as members of the committee, and have said the exact same thing here. We're available. We can do all of the things that I just described. Come to us when you have something you'd like to do, and that's where we haven't had any more conversations.
And my conversations, the crux of them were that if the one component of the project makes it unaffordable, the land's either too expensive or some other component, so that right now, private industry won't step up and do it because it's not cost effective. And so the only way we're going to get certain low-income housing in certain locations in and around the city is to work with us or some other entity or get something for free. Or some type of a deferred mechanism to pay for it over time. But I take it you haven't really had any detailed conversations about any particular lots or parcels or that type of thing.
Mr. Chairman, not recently. I think a great example of what you're talking about, it happened in Cheyenne too. We have a parcel of 160 acres off of 4 Mile Road on the northeast corner of town, surrounded by developments and the city's soccer fields. Great parcel for development. However, when we looked at developing that, there's no sewer line available to it. So we would have to pay, the state would have to pay, or the developer would have to pay to get the sewer line up the hill and to that, which makes it completely cost prohibitive. So unless we as the state land office or somehow the legislature appropriated fund or the city of Cheyenne appropriated funds to get that sewer line up there, the land remains vacant without development. And that's a great example of what you just talked about.
And then statutorily, it'll be fairly simple to change the 75 years to 99 years or 101 years or whatever it needs to be, if they release it to them for that value. I mean, that's a fairly simple statutory fix. The question is, what do I do with the trick, basically? In some places, people don't mind building on a lease, on a long-term lease. That's not, I don't think it's a common thing in Wyoming.
Mr. Chairman, I think we've seen that exact same thing. Financing is the major hurdle there, and if you need financing and your lender requires it, then that's the hurdle. If none of those exist, then the hurdle doesn't exist either.
And then to perform land swaps, say for that 160 acres, how long would something like that take to get done?
Mr. Chairman, that's, if we were able to do something with that parcel, it would raise in priority fairly high. And I think anywhere from 6 months to a year, we could complete our part of the process.
So, further questions? Senator Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one other question I thought about, and this may just muddy the waters, I don't know, but I got thinking about, you talked about, at least in this bill draft, prioritizing those subdivisions that might, buff up against municipal lands. With the situation that we have with county and city, cities can go this far into the county. What does that do with state lands when there's an issue like that?
Mr. Chairman, I don't know if I can fully answer that question. I'm not sure how far cities can go into counties. We do have some question about how any of those regulations would apply to state lands, but at the same time, we want to make sure that we're developing in a good and responsible way. And so having involvement with the local government and however far their jurisdiction goes, we want to make sure we have that partnership in those discussions.
Thank you.
Stacey?
Mr. Chairman. Director, I'm trying to get my head around this a little bit here. So is this for single-family residential, or would it be for apartment complexes, multifamily, a combination of that? All of it would be allowed, or?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Jones, yeah, this isn't our legislation, so I'm not sure what the intent is as far as limiting the type, but anything could be developed on state lands under the appropriate leasing structure, leasing provisions.
Go ahead, Mike.
Quick question, just to better understand. I just went and pulled up that 460 acres that you have off of 4 Mile in Cheyenne. That land is not available for purchase by a developer, or could it, under the right circumstance, be sold? Give me just a bit of background about how those lands might be disposed of. I know I've heard of swaps and those sorts of things, but would it ultimately be available for sale for a developer?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Martin, yes, every parcel of state land is currently available for sale or exchange. An applicant simply needs to go through the application process. There's nothing held back and there's nothing advertently offered. Everything's available on the same plane.
But, I mean, ultimately, that's in the discretion of the land board.
Mr. Chairman, great clarification, yes. Yeah, the whole process would be ultimately need approval by the Board of Land Commissioners to actually be completed.
Unless we chose otherwise.
Mr. Chairman.
We call it helping.
Okay, further questions? Anything else, Jason?
Mr. Chairman, if you wanted to talk about the bill, I could talk about that. There's not a lot. We appreciate the addition of the word residential. As I said, we already feel we have that ability and we currently do that. But having it clarified within statute is certainly helpful to say this could be a use of state lands, just to be very clear with that. Obviously, amending the 75 years to 99 years would remove some development hurdles. But on page 5, Mr. Chairman, where the meat of the statute is, we want to make sure that we're clear. The purpose of these lands is obviously for the benefit of the beneficiaries. And we appreciate the statement in this section E that it's in the public interest to develop these. We're going to analyze this for the benefit of the beneficiaries and try to have a public benefit as well and try to marry those two missions together as much as possible. Just wanted to provide that for you. And also, we read this and we just want to make sure that we're clear if the intent of this addition of subsection E is that if state lands were to be leased for residential purposes that are adjacent to a municipality, we will prioritize, or we are to prioritize, affordable housing. It's not that every parcel of state land adjacent to a municipality will be offered for affordable housing, or that we are going to push off grazing for affordable housing, or we're going to push off some other commercial use for affordable housing. But when a parcel's identified for lease for residential purposes, either through a loan application when it comes in, or sole application when it comes in, or if we initiate an RFP type process, that we'll start focusing more on affordable housing if that's one of the options. I just want to make sure that we're clear on the intent there.
Well, and I think part of that language, the intent is to say, in this situation, you don't necessarily, the priority is not the beneficiary. It's the purpose of providing housing to low incomes. So it's so we're changing the balance, basically. I mean, I think that's the point of that language, which makes it easier for you to facilitate and not have to go through that analysis to the degree that you do.
Appreciate that clarification. And with that, I will say we may still have a little bit of a conflict with the constitutional requirements for these lands, but that's something that we can work
That's also
through.
why, because it's to help the poor, so I think we can get around the constitutional component of it. And we can specify that in that language as well, just so that we understand the issue and we're intentionally addressing it so that it's not going to be misunderstood after we pass the language.
Very good.
Okay. All right. Anything else on the bill? That's all.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Appreciate it, Jason. Question? Go ahead.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Deputy Director, has there ever been a member of the board that did have concerns about missing the residential piece, or have they all felt pretty comfortable with the language that we've had for residential projects when they've come up?
And Mr. Chairman, I don't believe we've ever had any conversation with any member of the board about that being gone. We, as the staff or the administrative arm for the board, have raised it a few times, saying it could be beneficial to have it clarified there, but they've not brought it to us, to my attention, or to my knowledge.
Okay, further questions for Jason? Anything else you want to talk about today?
I'm good. Thank you very much, sir.
Okay. I think committee, what's the committee's pleasure? Before
Mr.
we
Chairman,
dive too deeply into this.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead, Dave.
I just, if I may, I wanted to give just a little bit of background. This bill differs from some of the other bills that the committee is looking at. I wanted to highlight this Bill 24 as well as 10 and 17 are actually corporations committee bills. So the actions that the committee take today are a little bit more limited than they might otherwise be. The Corporations Committee will be meeting July 30th and 31st in Evanston to consider these bills. So as you think about what changes you might want to see, what we will do is prepare a letter for the Corporations Committee with any amendments that you elect to make so that they can consider those at their meeting. Alternatively, certainly if you wanted LSO to draft a bill specifically for this task force, we could do that, and then the task force could take action as they normally do on that. But this particular bill, and again, 10 and 17 are corporations bills.
And so, David, my recollection, Mr. Co-Chair, is that we had a conversation with the co-chairs of corporations and told them that we were going to at least put them on our agenda and talk about them. And they were both happy for us to do that. So if we choose to support this bill and amend it or work it, they would be happy if we did it, and then they would take it off their agenda, or we would, after we've done working it, they'll bring it back up at the latter part of the year and see if they concur with what this committee decides to do. That was my recollection. Was that yours?
Yes, sir.
So is that, I think that kind of clarifies that particular issue. And I'd forgotten about it until it just popped back into my head that we had that conversation. So once again, let's go back to the committee. Is this a bill that this committee would like to play with, modify, and/or amend to facilitate low-income or affordable housing, or have the ability at least for the state to do that. In order for them to do it, I think obviously the law has to be changed, amended to some degree. So, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I appreciate this bill. I think over my side of the state where we're seeing so many projects popping up, Rock Springs, Cameron, Evanston, I think we certainly need a bill like this because we don't have enough affordable housing for our folks that'll be coming in, not just workers, but hopefully some residents that'll take up, permanent residents later on. But so if we can help out the Corporation Committee, I don't know, what, did you say that they had actually had the bill drafted earlier, or is this the first draft of this bill, just out of curiosity, before I ask my question?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Schuler, they have not looked at this draft yet. They've got it, I believe, currently on their agenda for the July 30th and 31st meeting. And Mr. Chairman, I don't know if you want to have LSO walk through the bill at all. We do have Mr. Anderson who drafted it, who could answer any specific questions on the draft itself.
I'd be happy to support the bill, just,
And I think it'd be useful to walk through the bill so
Sure.
everyone kind of understands what it is. And so why don't you go ahead and do that?
Mr. Chairman?
Hey, Josh.
Yeah, Josh Anderson with the Legislative Service Office. As David noted, this was requested back in the April meeting of the Joint Corporations Committee, and it is on their agenda for the meeting in Evanston at the end of this month. So the committee hasn't had a chance to work this at all, but I can just walk you through the bill real quickly. Mr. Crowder kind of already touched on a lot of what's in there. But the bill does several things related to housing on state lands. First, it just makes absolutely clear that state lands can be leased for residential purposes, including some of the institutional lands. It specifies that the Board of Land Commissioners can consider an exchange of lands from federal government. They can consider areas suitable for leasing for residential purposes. And then finally, it provides that leasing on lands, state lands that border municipalities shall prioritize affordable housing to the extent permissible. And so just going through the bill really quickly, Mr. Chairman, really starts on page 3. The first thing, this is again related to that exchange of lands with the federal government. First, it just clarifies that any land conveyed to the state may be in a different area than the land that the state is exchanging those lands, so that they wouldn't be required to necessarily be in that same area. And then 2, the board may consider the acquisition of lands in areas suitable for leasing for residential purposes, as provided later in the bill. The next part, Mr. Chairman, this is related to duties of the Director of the Office of State Lands in response to related to those institutional lands. And on page 4, it just says that the alternative uses of those institutional lands can include leasing of lands for residential purposes. The remainder of page 4, you can see there we're just adding the word residential in a couple of spots. And you'll see actually on page 4, line 7 in the title, residential was already included in the title there, but then was not listed along with industrial and commercial throughout the rest of those sections. So this just adds that in to make that very clear that it can be leased for residential purposes. And then finally on page 5, it adds that new section E, just stating that when leasing lands for residential purposes, the board shall, and here's a qualifier, to the extent consistent with the constitutional requirements and the requirements of this article, provide a priority for affordable housing projects on state lands with those lands that directly adjacent to or border municipal boundaries. And then it just adds a sentence at the end stating that it is in the public interest to facilitate the provision of affordable housing to promote economic welfare, increase employment, stimulate economic activity, and augment tax revenues. So that's the bill, Mr. Chairman. It does not go in and change that 75-year time frame, which is on page 4, line 11. Some versions of this bill that were discussed by the Revenue Committee a few years ago did make that 99-year change, but that isn't included, at least in this current early draft of this bill. So that's the bill, Mr. Chairman. I take any questions.
Josh? Josh, thanks. Could you, I'm sorry, didn't quite hear that last part about the 99 years. In the draft here, it says 75 years, but we've changed statute to it to be 99 somewhere else.
No, sorry, Mr. Chairman. Excuse me, sorry for the confusion there. In some previous versions of this bill that were considered by the Revenue Committee a couple years ago, we did have that change and then included, but those never passed, and then that change is so far not included in this draft of the bill.
Thanks, Josh.
And Josh, is this the same bill essentially in form that Revenue considered a few years ago?
This was a slightly revised, Mr. Chairman, a slightly revised version that was a private individual request last year. And that was the same member that requested this bill at the Corporations Committee. So it was based off of his most recent version of this bill. Slightly revised from those versions that were considered by Revenue.
A couple of questions. This doesn't really talk about a public-private partnership potential. It just talks about leasing. So if we wanted to broaden the ability to transfer, exchange, or sell, and do public-private partnerships, that would have to be modified. Correct?
I think that's correct, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, this is just, kind of making it crystal clear that the leases can be for residential purposes, and then adds this kind of new piece of encouraging the state Board of Land Commissioners to lease for residential purposes when it's adjacent to municipal boundaries.
Okay, Mike, go ahead.
So I saw, and you'd mentioned the amending of the 75 to 99 years. Is this the only part of statute that's relevant to? I assume, based on your response, that this is the only spot where it would have to be changed? Is in this statute?
I'd need to confirm that, Mr. Chairman. I believe this is the primary spot, at least, where it needs to be changed. It might be referenced in another spot. I can't recall for sure.
Just curious.
If that was the direction, we'd clean it up in both spots.
Very good, thank you. Other question, and I guess the definition of affordable housing as it's used in here, is that defined somewhere else? Or, because there's different terms. There's affordable housing, workforce housing, starter homes. And so I don't know that we'd want to put something too limiting in there, knowing that we're trying to cover a broader segment to try to get more, I'll say, reasonably priced homes. So just curious if that's defined anywhere.
Mr. Chairman, no, I don't believe there would be any applicable definition. It would kind of leave it up to the state board to make that determination of what would be an affordable housing project.
Jason, it occurs to me that we ought to have low-income housing versus affordable, because that has a more constitutional justification for doing it. Does that make sense? Would you agree?
I think that's reasonable, Mr. Chairman, yes.
Rennie, go ahead.
On that topic, so as I'm reading this, this is a cleanup to clarify that a residential lease is an allowable lease. It's already a practice that is happening, but it provides that additional clarity. And maybe Josh, if you can answer this, with the way this is written now, it seems that it's allowable, but then you'd have to look at the Constitution to understand about the analysis of the proposed lease for residential and its benefit for beneficiaries. So, Josh, is the language in here now get us to a point where OSLI could analyze a proposed residential lease and essentially take less value for it and get less benefit for it if it was for low-income housing? Because otherwise, we're not helping the developer at this point, specifically with the lower land cost. They'd be looking at fair market value as what would have to be the purchase price, right?
Yeah, so, Mr. Chairman, yeah, I think as drafted, I think it provides that direction that these types of projects should be a priority. It gives them some ability to determine that those are in the public interest, but it also, I think, still, specifically calls out that they need to comply with those other constitutional requirements of obtaining a high return for the property.
So, Josh, it seems to me that we're not addressing the primary issues. The primary issue here is the purpose of developing state properties is because we have a shortage of low-income housing. And we know that, for example, Laramie County is going to need 5,000 new home units in the next 5 to 12 years. We know that the southwest corner of the state is probably going to develop anywhere between 10 to 15,000 new homes across that region in the next 5 to 10 years, based upon the current growth projections for development. And we also know that the private market at this point is not in a position to build those and to be economically viable, particularly for low-income housing, and for and how that will be rented or leased out. And so the whole purpose of this exercise is to, within the Constitution, make these properties available for development at the lowest cost possible and not the maximum return of the property, in order to facilitate homes for the low-income individuals or for the poor. And that's how we circumvent that constitutional requirement, because we can do it. And so what I'm thinking is that this will have to be retailored for that particular purpose in the language that's currently in this draft. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think I would agree, Mr. Chairman. I think the approach that this draft took was kind of to, number one, just really clarify that these can be used for these residential projects, and then to definitely provide that encouragement to use these for those residential purposes, but doesn't go all the way to require that to be done.
And so the general hypothesis is that theoretically, at some day and age, it may pay for itself, or we may get a return, but we want to encourage development without an initial cash outlay or a purchase price. Because otherwise, we're not doing we're not really promoting and enhancing quick development for low-income housing. So, Eli, you got some comments?
No, just listening.
Well, you look good. Go ahead, Bob.
Mr. Chairman, are we considering this because a lack of property available or for development, or is it a lack of affordable property, or what are we looking at? What circumstances would deem this applicable? There's no more land there, or that's surrounded by federal ground, or what?
Sure. I mean, there is no lack of property if you just want to pay the price for it. I mean, there's 2 or 3 different situations in and around Cheyenne that the construction of the low-income housing just is not cost efficient. So it's not getting done. So what the concept, at least in part, is a mechanism to make the land available, to have the construction performed, and just to get the housing done. But it's strictly for low-income housing, in order to facilitate the economic conditions to continue the growth that needs to happen and is going to happen, and just get the stuff built. So,
Follow up then, Mr. Chairman, and that's because private property is too expensive,
correct.
so.
It
if we're-
doesn't pencil, is my point, yeah.
Or, yeah, so we're going to put this at a lower market value in order to enhance the low income housing.
That's correct. And one of the places this is even a greater need is probably Teton County. I mean, we know the price of land there is astronomically high. And so, but we do have state leases that are checkerboard, are all over Teton County. If we had that desire and the ability to do it. Go ahead.
This does really bring up the core question about what are we trying to get at? And I think we've danced around a little bit to some of the core issues, and that was the Harvard Group's study showed that there were two main factors that were increasing costs of housing in Wyoming, not subsidized housing, just all housing. And one of them was we are more heavily regulated in Wyoming across local and state than other states. And generally speaking, the United States is fairly tightly regulated when it comes to housing. So us being above average for too many regulations is particularly prohibitive in terms of cost, and especially cost per unit. And then the other factor was infrastructure for housing, so that it's more expensive or that there is not as much of the arterial infrastructure in place that to make it, to have it be easier for the private sector to respond to that arterial infrastructure to build the specific housing development. And I think Mr. Crowder's comment about the one parcel in Laramie County touches on that. There's a parcel sitting there, but nobody's interested in it because there's no arterial infrastructure there. So state land or private land, I think that there is just a situation where municipalities don't recoup their costs when they build out arterial infrastructure into a part of town or expand it. So they don't do it, and then the private sector's left to do it, and then they have to, the private sector developers, and Mr. Martin can probably tell us a lot more about this, build a higher end product because that's the way they recoup that cost on all that arterial infrastructure to get the water and sewer out to a new property. So I think my take on this conversation about the state lands is it would definitely help where that is true, that the land costs are what's prohibitive. But if you don't also deal with the arterial infrastructure and being able to get the water and sewer out to that property, you still have a higher cost issue that isn't necessarily going to help us take on this housing issue. So I think that we've got a great opportunity where we can try to lower the regulatory burden in that place. But I think we always have to keep an eye on the fact that there's an arterial infrastructure issue too for these communities, and that just because the regulations are low doesn't mean you're going to get dense development built if you don't have the water in place to do it.
Go ahead.
As far as the infrastructure, do we go through the existing channels that we have and reduce, it's 66, 34, or whatever the ratio is with dealing with water development? Do we reduce that area there to achieve that leveler playing field that you're referring to? Or do we sacrifice the state land at a lower cost to try and level that playing field? That's because the state land is obligated to do this, where our other funds available through the state, through water development stuff, maybe we need to look at more grant parts in there to change that if the infrastructure is the issue there. Changing that formula in there.
Yeah, and essentially, the answer to that is you make more funds available through our grant process for infrastructure. So, okay, any other more thoughts on this particular bill? Go ahead.
One other one is, why do we limit it to 4,000 population? Should that be a little lower number to reach more of the state, or we just, it says in population areas of 4,000 or greater. I think it's on page 2. Line 21.
You're in a different bill draft.
You want a different bill draft?
Yeah, we're on 24.
Well, how did I get this one? Yeah, it's not the first time, Mr. Chairman, I've been on the wrong bill.
You want to limit it to the people under 4,000 then?
Where is that one at?
Mr. Chairman, I think the comment about restricting this only to low income, that's a pretty specific federal definition. And I know we want to pass constitutional muster for the good of the people to be able to get past that high requirement. But there are all types of affordable housing that are needed that will help with housing stock across. So I don't know that we'd want to be quite as restrictive as getting to that low income that requires, for us at WCDA, that we go through HUD and we have to be under all of those strict guidelines. So I think if we kept it to workforce housing or a definition that we can all agree on, that would be more positive long-term for those that want to develop housing that is much more affordable than what we see today. Thank you.
So let me, you have a question? Yeah, please.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I would just follow along with Mr. Martin. I was just going to say you could easily add on page 1, prioritize low income or affordable housing, real easy. It includes both of them. I think they both can be defined easily, and that should take care of our constitutional issues. So I think you could wordsmith it, and that's just me. I don't know. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I would agree. And I think the devil's in the details, and that would essentially fall at some point back to OSLI on how they modify their rules to pass constitutional muster on what they can and can't do. So, but now back to the committee. My question is, does this committee want to work this bill and come up with a draft or changes that we can then submit back to the corporations, or what is the committee's preference?
Mr. Chairman, I think it's worth working the bill, if for no other reason than to extend the 75 to 99 years to get that kicked into that arena so that that can have more discussion as it gets to their committee here at the end of the month. The rest of the complexity of around lower affordable housing units might need some more work, but I think the 75 to 99 year to give confidence to the banking community to be willing to lend on those assets that would sit on that land is productive, in my opinion. Thank you.
Further comments? Does everyone agree or disagree?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I was just going to say, you and I were on the same wavelength, because I was going to say, that's the only thing that I think that really needs to be changed on this bill. I think the bill in its shape, the form it's in right now, is in pretty good shape. I don't know that we need to fix much else. But I like the bill, and I think it's something we need to push forward, whether it comes from a recommendation from our task force or from corporations. But I think it's something that, like I said, particularly in my corner of the state, I know we need this, we're going to need this. So I don't want to see it, go into the weeds and disappear.
So committee, I think we don't really have to work the bill. We can just say, make amendments, make a new draft, add 99, and include affordable and low-income housing. And then you can kind of give a synopsis of our discussions and then pass it back to corporations, and we'll see what they want to do with it. Does that sound good for the committee? All right, that's what we'll do. Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Any public comment on this bill?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. A question. Hi, Josh. How you doing? And a question for Josh. I know in some of these areas on the low-income housing side, there's tax credits and different mechanisms, and we built a couple of units in Riverton. I know they've gone in Casper. I'm not familiar with Cheyenne, but how does that fit in the framework of what we're talking about? It seems to me that it would just be an addition to it, should not have any negative effects on it. Would it be positive, or would it just be standalone and then they would come in and participate at some level? How would that work?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Senator Bebout, yeah, I think this would be a separate approach to try to get just more lands available. I think it would be different from some of those tax credit programs, to my limited knowledge of those.
I think the intent, Eli, is that this would be in addition to, I mean, if you're building low affordable housing, those tax credits are there. It doesn't really matter how you got the property if you're leasing it. I think the credits are still available. At least
Yeah,
that's
Mr.
what I
Chairman,
understand.
that would be my understanding too, and that could be, yeah, okay, well, that's my understanding as well, and so that's good. Thank you.
Okay, committee? Next. What's next? Are we on the exactions bill? 134. Screen's working. Yep, screen. Go ahead, Dan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. David Hopkinson with the Legislative Service Office, walking through 25 LSO 134, Property Development Exactions. This bill is kind of an updated version from one that the committee, or the task force looked at last year, 24 LSO 286. What this draft would do, generally speaking, is limit the amount of impact or mitigation fees that could be charged on certain developments. And so looking and walking through that then, and I would note up front, the square footage that you'll see in the bill, the cash limits, those are absolutely up for discussion, discretion of the committee. Those amounts aren't anything that was intended to be set in stone. Then the bill starts off by creating a new chapter, Land Use Regulations, in 1613-101. We see some definitions there, a few that I want to highlight. Starting on page 3, paragraph 2, the land use permitting authority would be any city, town, or county, special district, planning commission, zoning commission, or other entity of state or local government that issues land use permits. So that's intended to be pretty broad. Basically, anybody that issues a land use permit provides a definition for land use permit. That means any permit for residential or commercial development that is required by state law, local ordinance, or rule to be obtained before land can be subdivided for residential or commercial development, or a structure can be built or renovated, or an addition can be built onto the structure. I would note that this bill kind of creates 3 distinctions and makes a distinction between residential property, commercial or residential structures, commercial development, and agricultural. And it specifically later on excludes any type of agriculture from being subject to this bill. On page 4, we see the definition there for mitigation or exaction fee. And that provides that it is a fee charged by a land use permitting authority as a condition of receiving a land use permit that bears no reasonable relationship to the costs of providing services to the proposed development or to mitigating a direct negative impact of the proposed development, but which is intended or primarily to address external issues to the proposed development in a city, town, or county. And that mitigation or exaction fee may be a dollar amount, or it may also take the form of required concessions. There's some staff comments there to note, particularly in that definition of mitigation or exaction fee. The task force may wish to consider making it a little more narrow, perhaps specifying in particular what type of mitigation fees, such as housing, transportation, et cetera, that it is intended to address. On page 5 then, we see the end of the definitions. We get more into the meat of the bill in 1613-102. And that provides that a land use permitting authority, and I'm just going to kind of quickly summarize these. A, provides that it shall not require, as a condition for the use or permit of a proposed residential development, any mitigation or exaction fee when that development does not exceed 4,000 square feet. It may, in subsection B, charge a mitigation fee of $50 per square foot for a single-family residential dwelling that exceeds 4,000 square feet. In C, it prohibits a mitigation fee for multifamily residential dwellings that do not exceed 2,500 square feet for any single unit within that residential dwelling. D would make it permissive in an amount not to exceed $50 per square foot for any multi-residential dwelling unit that exceeds 2,500 total square feet for any single unit within that multi-residential dwelling. E, and we're over on page 7, applies to commercial developments and would prohibit a fee on any structure, commercial structure that does not exceed 5,000 total square feet, would allow for a fee of $35 per square foot, or not to exceed $35 per square foot for a structure that's over 5,000 total square feet. And then E is where we see the kind of exclusion for any structure built for agricultural purposes. And then finally, another staff comment there that the task force may wish to consider is spelling out or specifying when that exaction fee needs to be, or when it can be imposed, either that, for example, for subdividing or for a zoning change or for a building permit, at what stages of the process is that fee imposed or could be imposed. You may also wish to consider adding definitions for single-family residential dwelling or multifamily residential dwelling. Section 2 is just some conforming amendments in the statutes for cities, towns, and counties, cities, towns, and counties, that would allow or restrict the governing bodies that they can only impose mitigation or exaction fees to the extent authorized by this newly created section. And then section 3 provides that this would apply to all applications for permits submitted for residential or commercial development after July 1st, 2025. In section 4, the effective date would be July 1st, 2025. With that, I'd stand for any questions.
Questions for David? So do we know how many cities or counties impose exaction fees now in Wyoming?
Mr. Chairman, I don't have that off the top of my head, but we can certainly get that information.
Now, I think we need to go back to kind of the square one from last year and provide the background data of why we're here, and why this is in front of us, and what other states do, so that the committee can have a kind of informed background to know the rationalization of this type of a bill and what other states have done and how much those exaction fees are, and the different types of exaction fees, and also the limitations on that. And probably equally as important is the definition of what a reasonable nexus is. Because that's kind of the crux of the rationalization of it, and any caps that other states have and located, so that, you know, I think the $50 and the $35 were numbers we just plugged them in. And so we need to know what that translates into in terms of current practices and how much that would cost, or for a 6,000 square foot home and a 10,000 square foot commercial building, so that we just understand what the bill does. And without that, we're kind of fishing in the dark. So does that make sense?
Sure, Mr. Chairman, we're happy to provide that information.
And so committee, my inclination, and I've had this brief discussion with the co-chair, that this bill is probably not ready for prime time, because we just need more information, and we need to bring the committee up to speed on the background information, and have the new folks just get caught up to speed on it, and also give the opportunity for various communities to address it as well, and comments or changes or modifications. So that being all said, I'd like to get everyone's input on, do we want to proceed with this? And if is it a bill that this committee wants to at least examine and learn more about, and then eventually consider? So just let me know your feelings. And
Mr. Chairman, Representative Stith has his hand up.
okay, Representative Stith, you're muted. You're muted, Clark. Now he's frozen.
There, can you hear me now?
Yeah, we got you.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I wanted to ask Mr. Hopkinson about the definition of mitigation or impact fee. And I'm curious as to why the definition reads the way it does, because it seems like it's problematic because it requires that the mitigation fee bear no reasonable relationship to the cost of services provided. And I'm concerned that definition would mean that a local planner could just say, well, we're not imposing a mitigation fee. We're just charging you a reasonable traffic demand mitigation fee because you're going to have 31 trips to your restaurant each day. And we're going to charge you $7,000 per trip, as Teton County has proposed. And that they would say that doesn't count as a mitigation fee, even though they would be shaking down the business owner for a couple $100,000. So can you tell me about the definition and why it reads the way it does?
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Stith, I would be frank, quite upfront and say I think this definition does need some work. Not gonna deny that. As far as why, I think when this request was made, there was some broad looks at kind of how to tailor this, and this is what we ended up with. But I do think absolutely there's room for improvement and clarity as far as what we want it to specifically apply to. And I think that concern that, maybe being too narrow or too broad, both has possibilities to be abused. So I do think that definition needs some work.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, follow up?
Please.
Well, thank you, Mr. Hopkins. And I guess just let me say, I think I would like to pursue some version of this bill. And my preference would be to essentially define mitigation fee to mean any fee that's other than just the administrative costs of the staff time to process the permit, and then say that you can't impose a fee unless the impact is uniquely and directly attributable to the use, which is, and I take that standard from one of the alternative standards in the Nolan Dolan series of cases that the Supreme Court decided not to use. I just believe it's important for us to keep the scope of these mitigation fees under control. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, and I mean, that makes perfect sense, that we use the Nolan Dolan US Supreme Court outline in our definition, because as of today, that's still the golden rod of determination. So, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I would tend to agree, and I definitely think this bill needs a lot of work, and I know we've gotten a lot of input on it. And couldn't agree more with Representative Stiss' notion that we have to establish a reasonable nexus to any fees or any caps or anything that we put on, because I know a lot of people that do impose these fees, some who have gone through those studies and have applied that same standard. And so we definitely we can't just pull numbers out of the air on this, and we have to provide rational nexus for the numbers that we do provide. And I think that, like I say, I know we've gotten some input from the cities, towns, counties on this bill, and I think we should, take a look at those. Once again, we're the Regulation Reduction Task Force, and we want to try it. What we're trying to do is make this streamlined, but we also want to make sure that we're doing so in a way that passes legal muster. So I think that that's something we have to really keep in mind as we go through this.
Winston.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry, I just had a question. The 4,000 square feet for the home size, is that just something they had worked with before, or where did we determine that? Because there's a lot of areas in Wyoming that have basements. So a 4,000 square feet might only be 2,000 square feet finished and a 2,000 square feet unfinished basement. So I think that makes a difference. Or if it's a 3-story, 2-story with a basement. Anyway, 4,000 I kind of feel like is too small. It needs to be a larger home if you're going to impose mitigation fees.
So I think the answer to that, you mentioned it earlier, it's just a placeholder. Those numbers aren't, and the 50 and the 35 are just placeholders. So David, I think we'll probably put together a working group for this, to work on this bill. What we're going to need, I think, is a synopsis of the testimony from last year, so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel, but to provide to all our members. And if any of the folks that testified last year on this, I think we had at least 2 committee meetings where this was discussed. If those folks that provided testimony back a year ago want to supplement or update or just put their testimony in writing so we can see it beforehand, before our next meeting, and so the members can see it and read it and analyze what those positions are, as well as whatever the work group will be as we move forward with this bill. Okay? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not volunteering for the working group, just making sure you
yes, you
understood that. Just a question. No, what I'd really like to see from the working group is, I would like to have a little more data too, to find out if this is something that other cities and towns and counties are dealing with. I mean, we know what was going on in Teton County because we had our last meeting there. And I think certainly that we need to take a real close look at that because I was quite, I have to admit, I was kind of blown away by some of the fees that are charged up there. But it'd be nice to know what other cities and counties are doing and kind of have a little historical background so that this does not end up being just a Teton County thing. We don't want that. So if you wouldn't mind doing that, whoever's on the working group.
So my recollection from last year is the testimony was no one has had an exaction fee except from Teton County. I now know that to be incorrect because I know that at least the city of Cheyenne has a $400 per door exaction fee that I just learned about recently. And what's interesting about that is that is used basically to maintain or to build new local parks around various subdivision areas, or part of it is used for that. And so, and then the question is, you know, it's a valuable thing, but is there a reasonable nexus using the funds that way? But those are the things that, another things, just things we have to think about. And it would be useful to know if there are other cities or counties that have some other type of fee similar to that, that they may not call it an exaction, but some mitigation fees of some nature. Go ahead.
I guess one question that I have is, was there any sort of distinction made in the previous dialogue between exactions and impact fees? It seems like impact fees are probably the more, I would say impact fees might be the idea that is of concern here in Wyoming than perhaps exactions. I think exactions are a little more broad, at least in the practical use of the idea. And impact fees might be more appropriate as a target with regard to discussions that this could take.
Well, as a planner, how do you differentiate the two?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I'm not exactly in the planning field, but I employ planners, and they educate me regularly about these kinds of things, which is great. I appreciate it. But what I heard you describe in terms of a per door fee for certain development needs that the new neighborhood might have, that strikes me as purely an impact fee. Whereas if a city or a town has had for a long, long time plant investment fees with regard to water and sewer infrastructure that help spread the cost of those kinds of investments that have been made prior to people tying into city water and sewer, to me that strikes more as an exaction and not as much of a target for criticism, at least in the 20-some years that I've been working here in Wyoming. So that would be what I would offer, that maybe we focus a little bit more with respect to what it is we're trying to target and perhaps curtail by way of regulation reduction.
Yeah, I think the target here is more of not increasing the costs of construction.
Right.
To make it onerous or not feasible or just more expensive, raising the cost as opposed to just making it as a regulatory reduction. It's kind of the reverse concept.
Makes sense.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'm just sitting here listening to this conversation and thinking about another area where we have to deal with impact fees. It's the Industrial Siting Act, and there's a percentage there, but there's a formula, and I can't quite remember how they did it, but maybe there's something we can glean from that, the way we adjust those impact fees to those areas that are impacted by large industrial plants, and it's a percentage, maybe it's a percentage of sales tax. I know Todd's there, maybe I'm way in left field on this, and maybe there's really no correlation, but it just seems to me that we figured out a way to do that neither side likes it, so it must work. And maybe there's something we can learn from that.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so Mr. Chairman, yeah, with the Industrial Siting Act, the impact assistance that's paid, and it's paid by the general fund, is a percentage, and it's the state's share of the 4-cent tax. So it's 2.69%, I believe.
Yeah, I think that's correct. Yeah,
Mr. Chairman, what we do is the state just kicks in money for it based on that percentage then. I understand it. Okay.
Clark, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, and at the risk of being repetitive, I think, from my point of view, the ideal bill draft would not just adopt the Nolan-Dolan test that the impact fee be roughly proportional, but have a tighter state law standard that would say that the fee must be directly and uniquely attributable to the proposed land use or development. On industrial siting council issues, right now, our large industries, they themselves, they don't pay, frankly, anything more than what they would otherwise pay under the sales tax for large industrial projects. We're just diverting some of the sales tax that they would otherwise pay to the local community, which is fine. But I think the problem that we're trying to solve, I think, is to frankly stop some of the local abuses where local communities find it to be pretty good business to be able to pursue a low growth or a no growth strategy by charging high impact fees that are not directly and uniquely attributable to the development. And I will stop talking. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I think you're actually volunteering.
I do care about the issue, Mr. Chairman.
So this is going to be the third working group that you're on with me, this interim.
We'll get to know you. I always appreciate time I get to spend with you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, further comments from the committee? So I take it there's a general agreement that we move forward with this draft bill. So we will put together a working group, which I will be on, and Clark. Who from our Senate chamber would like to participate?
I think that Senator Jones and I would like to
Okay,
help.
all
We'd
right.
love that.
We'll put you two guys on it. And now so we're not going to do a whole lot more on this bill, but if there was public comment on the general concept of this and to help educate this committee, come on up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Committee,
You have to be very careful about being on this working group because the person that on the table in front of me is my landlord whenever I go to Jackson.
thank you for reminding me that, Mr. Chairman, and certainly the rates might change. So obviously, as a representative of one of the communities that has been called out as potentially taking advantage of these mitigations and exactions or shaking down businesses or whatever the description is, I would like to say,
Does that mean you're the exactor?
personally, no. But that the town has written a letter and stated their position, and I won't expand upon that. But my purpose of coming up here is to caution you in putting actual values into any statute. Because whether we're using the exact Nolan-Dolan nexus and proportionality or Representative Stith directly attributable, these are going to differ from community to community. That's how you can't meet the Nolan-Dolan definition if you have this broader new number put into place. So I would just ask the working group not to put specific numbers into the next draft, but make them a description of what these fees can be. I could go on, but I won't in interest of time and not angering my tenant.
So the question is, without being too top down, if you will. So it's us setting the guidelines, it seems to me that what we really want to do is put some type of caps on it. But how do we determine what those are in terms of reasonableness? Because so up to a certain amount. How do we do that as opposed to if we don't put in a percentage or some type of a measurement?
Mr. Chairman, committee, I think, yes, percentage would percentage of the value of or cost of the development would be a more appropriate mechanism. I mean, all my years on the planning commission, Nolan and Dolan was kind of our guide consistently, and that is nexus and proportional. And I'll just pick roads as an example. The construction of roads, a lot of it's dependent upon the cost of labor. And in Teton County, the cost of labor is much higher than it's going to be in Campbell County. So if you put the same numerical value, it's not then going to be, the nexus won't apply.
That makes sense. Questions for, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Andy, you referenced the letter and I mentioned at the end of it related to the business owner that testified when we were in Jackson. And I think as we're trying to understand how Teton County, or in this instance, the town of Jackson, is dealing with this fee structure on different sizes businesses, what are you hearing is the effort to resolve that situation? Because I think we were all pretty shocked at the number that small business owner was facing. So what is the town of Jackson, they allude that they're trying to deal with that issue. Do you know what they're trying to do and to deal with business owners in the town of Jackson?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. McKay, I'm not completely informed, but my understanding is that that particular case was not related to new construction. It was a change of use. And they are now going back to review whether to adjust that change of use or actually say, once a building is constructed, there shouldn't be a change of use fee. But at this point, they have not, I'm unaware that they've actually got a draft ordinance to change it yet, but they're moving in that direction. There was certainly an awareness that it was not the most appropriate. I want to be careful with my language here because, like I said, I'm not informed on all the details, but that they do recognize that it did not work. I would add, though, that not all the information related to that incident was testified to, and there were some issues not mentioned in relationship to why that fee existed.
Mr. Chairman and fellow members of your small working group, it does look to me like the way this current legislation is written, it's only on a land use permit, so it wouldn't apply to a change of use permit. And so, in those instances, then just maybe that's something for you all to consider is that it seems like in Jackson, there's a few folks that are getting hit by this, and that this bill wouldn't address some of them. So since you've got a great resident of that community on the small working group, you'll probably have great insight.
Go ahead.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, thank you, and Mr. McKay. I will get back to the committee on what the town intends to do with that change of use ordinance. I just don't, at the time, have enough information to say they're going to eliminate it or they're just going to change the formula.
Okay, appreciate it. Well, we would like to know not only that, but every other type of exactions there are. Could be on roads, it could be on new construction, it could be on remodels, it could be on change of use, expansion, so.
Mr. Chairman, I will work to get that information for the committee. I would just have the ones I'm aware of are, besides housing, it's roads, it's water and sewer, it's parks, it's schools. And I think the discussion has always revolved around if a developer is coming in with a large development and there are not exactions, how does the community then pay for those costs? And Nolan and Dolan basically nationally has said that the developer has some level of responsibility.
Okay. Further questions for Andy? Go ahead, Stacy.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I just had one question. I think it was maybe Representative Stith that touched base on it, but that new mitigation fees are on the horizon also. So could you also give us more information about those that could be up and coming, like the number of people that you have coming to your shop on a daily basis or weekly basis or whatever? I've been told that that counting has started taking place, and I'm just wondering if you could also provide that so we can not only address the fees that you have now, but also maybe the ones that are coming in the future.
Mr. Chairman, Senator, I am unaware of any proposal on that basis, but I will certainly look. And for instance, I will add, Representative Stith was referring to something the county was considering, and although I was a county commissioner, at this time I am not tied to the county, but I can get that information as well.
Yeah, I think there was testimony that under the new proposed, and I don't know if they're just county, but they were going to almost double some of those fees. That's just my recollection. Okay, anything else for Andy? Okay, any other public comment? Come on up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is David Dearson. I'm an attorney for the Pacific Legal Foundation. We recently successfully represented Mr. George Sheets at the United States Supreme Court on a case dealing with these land use permit exaction fees. We've also successfully litigated two other major Supreme Court cases on this issue, including Nolan itself, as well as Kuntz versus St. John's River Water Management District. This is an important issue, and it's a good thing that the committee is taking this bill on. Unfortunately, from a constitutional perspective, there are serious flaws, and really the bill, as written, doesn't accomplish much. And I agree with the comments made by Mr. Representative Stith that the major problem is in the definition of mitigation or exaction fee. The issue is to satisfy the Constitution, all conditions that seek to exact money or property from a development permit applicant must be related in kind and in magnitude. That's the essential nexus and the rough proportionality with the anticipated negative impacts of the development. So the definition in this bill that defines a mitigation or exaction fee as, quote, it bears no reasonable relationship to mitigating a direct negative impact. Well, by definition, that kind of a fee would violate the Constitution. So what we'd recommend is amending the bill to distinguish between constitutional fees and unconstitutional ones. And what the bill refers to now are unconstitutional fees, and the only cap on those has got to be zero. And then if you want to introduce, additional ceilings to provide relief for developers and promote affordable housing, commercial, agricultural development, you can put those caps on the constitutional fees. So you can cap those fees which do relate in both kind and magnitude to the negative impacts of development, but the fees which don't have such relation can't be charged at all.
Okay, questions? Good to see you here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, anybody else? Any other public comment? You'll have plenty of other opportunities because obviously this bill is coming back in a new form and format, so. All right, seeing none, we'll close public comment, and I think we know we won't take any other further action on this bill. So it's 3 o'clock. Does anyone want to take a quick break or do we want to keep going? Okay, I think we're going to keep going. All right, what's next, Hank? 2510?
Not a bill draft, it's a memo. Mr. Chairman, members of the task force, again, Hank Oversland with LSO. I'll be presenting item 9-01 in your packet. It's a memorandum dated July 3rd.
Yep, I got it.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, this memorandum is in response to a request from the co-chairman to kind of identify what funding mechanisms there are currently in place for infrastructure and other housing supply needs for local governments, and to see what other states are doing. And this also includes historical appropriations in it. So according to the Business Council last year, they came in front of the task force at its Lander meeting, and they identified 5 different programs that are assisted at the state level that can help with these issues, infrastructure and housing. So those are the Unmet Housing Needs Program, Business Ready Communities, Clean and Drinking Water State Revolving Funds, and Capital Construction Loans. What this does not include is direct distribution, which is a bill that is passed by the legislature that could also be used for infrastructure, but sometimes I think what has been found is that it goes to city and county general funds. And then the Community Development Block Grant Program, which is a federally funded program that's administered by the WCDA. The first program is the Unmet Housing Needs Grant Programs. This is actually a series of 2 programs. The first program was authorized by the American Rescue Plan Act Appropriations Bill in 2023. And then there was also a generally funded side to this that was appropriated and created in the 2023 supplemental budget bill. These programs are both administered by the Office of State Lands and Investments, while awards are granted by the SLIB. These programs provide grants to municipalities, counties, and tribal governments, but have somewhat slightly different criteria and purposes. So the first is the ARPA one, Mr. Chairman, and that was an authorization of $5 million for unmet affordable housing needs through infrastructure, which included utilities. This was a part of the larger $70.3 million local government support projects program, and the SLIB has awarded funds from this. This was done at its December 2023 meeting, totaling about $3.1 million, and that came in 2 grants to the city of Cheyenne and then the town of Jackson. Mr. Chairman, at this time, I believe there are no more applications being taken, and actually, I believe that through the budget bill this year, section, I believe it was 341 of the budget bill, that granted the governor broad authority to redeploy ARPA funds. He has redeployed those, or he has quote unquote swept them back. So that program is now closed. What I would add on that is under the authority granted to the governor's office in section 341, the governor's office has indicated that it is actively exploring options to redeploy unspent American Rescue Plan Act funds allocated to the state on other eligible low-income housing projects. So there could be more coming in the future that is under analysis, and I would defer to the governor's office on that. The other program is the generally funded Unmet Housing Needs Program, and this was another $5 million appropriation in section 334 of the 2023 Supplemental General Government Appropriations Bill. The purpose of this program was to provide grants for infrastructure, including water, sewer, and utilities, to support unmet affordable housing needs. But during the 2024 session in the budget bill, the legislature amended that requirement to include, to expand the program to include land acquisition and then include workforce housing needs in addition to affordable housing needs. As of the writing of this memorandum and this week, OSLI and the SLIB have not taken action. There was no rulemaking granted to do this, so it has been indicated that they'll write policy to do this, but they have authority to spend these funds and allocate these funds through the end of the current biennium, so through June of 2026. So they haven't taken that up yet, Mr. Chairman. The second program is the Business Ready Communities Program, which's purpose is to promote economic development and create additional economic health and a stronger state economy. This is administered by the Wyoming Business Council and is available to municipalities, counties, and tribes, or joint powers boards. Grants or loans awarded under this program are to be made for economic or educational development planning or infrastructure projects and include land purchases, buildings, facilities, infrastructure, rights of way, and other things. Mr. Chairman, grants or loans made under this program require final approval by the SLIB, and they require matching funds for grants. Loans are to be made at low or no interest rates. So at the task force's Lander meeting in the 2023 interim, the Business Council indicated that there was 3 primary ways where communities could get help on the housing issue. First is the Community Readiness Grant, which is or loan program. The second is economic development plans, and the third is feasibility studies. Community readiness grants can happen at $5 million, and the loan can be $5 million for a total of $10 million, while the economic development plan maximum total is $100,000, and the feasibility study plans total is $50,000, as written in the Business Council's rules. The Community Readiness Grant and Loan Program doesn't require specific business, but is focused on building the necessary infrastructure for future business development, which may include housing, and must be contained within the community's planning documents. The economic development planning grants are used to address future economic development and can help to a community to realize what housing they need and where that can be done. And feasibility study plans are done more on a site-specific place. So that's the Business Ready Community Grant Program. The third and fourth are the Clean Water and Drinking Water State Revolving Funds. Mr. Chairman, these are somewhat similar as they are federally funded that require a 20% state match. They're available to public subdivisions of the state, and OSLI is the administering agency while they're awarded by the SLIB again. DEQ and Water Development Office both help with review of applications in these programs, but the uses are a little bit different. So the uses for the Clean Water State Revolving Fund include sewer systems, stormwater drainage system, water pollution control, including landfills. While the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund includes drinking water systems, storage tanks, treatment plants, distribution and transmission, and distribution and or transmission lines. Both programs are eligible. Applicants are eligible for principal loan forgiveness depending on characteristics of their community, and interest rates are established by these same characteristics by rule. The final program mentioned by the Business Council is the Capital Construction Loan Program, which was created in the 2018 Capital Construction Bill, and this is also administered by OSLI. This program provides loans for infrastructure projects, airport projects, water, road and street projects, and is intended for political subdivisions of the state. Infrastructure projects are broadly defined, but can include hospitals, police, fire stations, recreational facilities, or transportation system facilities. To provide these loans, the SLIB has access to $175 million from the Permanent Mineral Trust Fund, and loans are made for a term of between 5 and 25 years and are made at the U.S. Treasury bond rate, but must be greater than or equal to 3%. And they can add a 2% risk premium on these loans, Mr. Chairman. As of June 30th, 2023, there were 8 active loans under this program totaling about almost $22 million. Some other programs that have already been touched on and I think were talked about, but kind of mesh between the two areas that this committee is focused on, which include energy and housing, is the Impact Assistance Program, which provides funds to localities for unmitigated impacts. And then the other one is the MRG program, or the Local Government Capital Construction Account, which receives revenues from federal mineral royalties, coal lease bonuses, and severance taxes. It's available to special districts, municipalities, and counties, and must be used on either emergency situations to the health, safety, or welfare of a community, to comply with a federal or state mandate, or to provide essential public services. Mr. Chairman, turning to page 5 of the memo, Table 1 shows that over the past 5 biennia, which includes the current biennium, appropriations for 4 of those 5 programs have totaled almost $287 million. The Capital Construction Loan Program isn't included because of the fact that it just has access to funds from the Permanent Mineral Trust Fund, and appropriations aren't directly made for that program. If you include direct distribution over those past 5 biennia, that's been a total of $607 million. And then another thing that I failed to mention was the American Rescue Plan Act bill, appropriations bill. This included 2 programs, which is the Eligible Water and Sewer Projects Program, and then the Local Government Projects Support Projects Program. These appropriations totaled $150 million. So that would bring up the total for these programs over the past 5 biennia, with direct distribution, the ARPA, and then federal funds for the Clean Water and Drinking Water State Revolving Funds to over $1 billion. What those federal funds for the Clean Water and Drinking Water don't include are the additional funds that the state will receive in the IIJA, which is the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which is federally funded, which are on top of what the state normally gets. So that would increase that. And so there has been, again, with those programs included, over $1 billion over the past 5 biennia, and then impact assistance totals over the past 3 biennia has been over, I'm going to do quick math here, $80 million about, Mr. Chairman. On other states, I took a look at 3 states. The first is Colorado, and that bill, Senate Bill 24-174, was enacted by the Colorado General Assembly. This requires housing needs assessments to be done by local governments, and then those are compiled to look at a whole statewide housing needs assessment. Additionally, they have the State Department of Local Affairs is required to develop a directory for affordable housing strategies, and they are also required to provide technical assistance to local governments through a $15 million continuously appropriated fund to the department. Furthermore, the Act requires local governments to include water supply and strategic growth elements in their required master plans. Water supply elements include location and adequacy of existing water supplies, and strategic growth plans are policies to promote strategic growth while preventing urban sprawl. The last 2 elements of the bill, the first is there are a multitude of state agencies that are required to prioritize applicants for their relevant grant programs for those localities that have complied with the law and completed those housing action plans. And then the last one is that the Act prohibits homeowners associations from prohibiting construction of ADUs or middle housing. Middle housing is defined as a residential structure that includes between 2 and 4 separate dwelling units in a structure, a townhome building, or a cottage cluster of up to 4 units. And this prohibition went into effect on July 1st, 2024. The second bill that was enacted by the Colorado General Assembly was 2024 Colorado Session Laws, Chapter 295, which implemented many of the policies of the governor's Executive Order D 2023-014, essentially what this does is it puts timelines on what the Department of Local Affairs Housing Division has to do in taking applications, completing them, and getting a contract out and awarding the funding. So that's the long and short of that bill. Current Nevada statute requires planning commissions in counties of a population of 100,000 or more to include a housing component, which includes 8 elements, and those are listed on the top of page 7. And then if a city or county is required to include this housing element, they must include 6 of the 12 elements on the bottom to meet those community housing needs. So that includes reducing impact fees, selling, donating, or leasing land, buying federal land, establishing a trust fund, expanding the expediting plan approval or other funding mechanisms. And governing bodies of these localities must annually report to the state, and those are published online. Finally, Utah includes an annual reporting requirement for counties to report their progress on the implementation of their moderate income housing plans, which has a multitude of requirements on those. And if municipalities don't do this, or counties don't do this, they're not eligible for funding from the Transportation Investment Fund. Furthermore, in 2024, the Utah legislature enacted House Bill 465, which allowed for funds appropriated by the legislature to be passed through to nonprofit housing organizations with those stipulations on it at the bottom of page 8. Mr. Chairman, with that, I would stand for any questions.
Questions for Hank? Go ahead. Senator Schumer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, it's interesting. Thanks for all the data. I appreciate it. I'm just interested in knowing kind of how many of our cities actually have master plans that would include a housing component. I recall, when I was on city council, we certainly looked at master plans and all of that. I just don't remember how much the housing was included. So I'm just kind of wondering if that, I don't want to do anything that's going to require the cities and counties to jump through more hoops than they do. I think it's a good idea to have some kind of an assessment or a directory, whether it's statewide, but I don't know how we would get to that without requiring them to do a lot of extra work. So I don't know, do you have any information on that within the state of Wyoming?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Senator Schuler, I don't have data on how many of those have actual strategic plans on housing, on how many municipalities have that. I don't believe it's required by the state currently, so I can't answer that question, but I could do some more research.
Okay. Other questions? Thanks, appreciate it.
Just a quick
Go ahead,
comment,
yeah.
Mr. Kochar. First, thanks for this. One of the things that we talked, I'm sorry.
Go ahead. Okay, Eli, go ahead, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's probably not any information we can get from Nevada or Colorado, but what about the appropriateness of the one in Utah? Do they have any measures to see the effectiveness of what they've done? Any kind of input, or that just they passed the laws and they haven't monitored it?
Mr. Chairman, as for the bill that required affordable and attainable housing development, those 15 strategies, there are annual reporting requirements on the municipalities and counties, and if they don't submit those, they're not eligible for transit investment funding. So that we could look at some of that.
Well, Mr. Chairman, what I'm looking for is, the number of housing units that they had before, then when they implemented the law, and maybe that's a way to do it, to quantify it, just to see the effectiveness of what they've done rather than just, there's another law and they did a bunch of reporting requirements. Did it really work? And maybe that's the way to do it. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Beabout, we can certainly look into those reports and see what they have. We could also, I believe the census has data on how many building permits are approved each year in each state, and so we can take a look at that as well and to see if there's any trend differences before and after the enactment of the bill.
Mr. Chairman, to that point, I think Minneapolis is actually a pretty good example of where on the zoning side of it, so some of these other states have required you need to enact a certain number of zoning changes. Minneapolis, I think their data is particularly relevant to, it's the dwelling units approved per 1,000 people, and they're now well above all their peers. So I think there's some good examples of communities that have enacted some changes and seen benefits because of them.
Okay, any other first questions? Thanks again, Hank. Okay, next. Come on up, Dave. Fire away.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. David Hopkinson with the Legislative Service Office to walk through 25 LSO 135, Required Housing Development Strategies. There are a number of things for the committee to consider with this bill draft, but essentially what it does is require certain cities and towns to adopt one of 13, or 5, excuse me, of 13 housing strategies intended to improve housing development within that city or town. I would note, as drafted, it requires any city or town with a population greater than 4,000. That number is kind of a placeholder. It's just to give the task force a kind of a lever to adjust. I would note other states have required different amounts of strategies for different sizes of populations, certainly something the task force could consider as well. But looking then at the specific requirements as drafted, on page 2, it would require that not later than July 1st, 2028, the governing body of each city or town, again with that population more than 4,000, as of July 1st, 2025, shall adopt not less than 5 of the following housing strategies. And then those strategies begin at the bottom of page 2, that they allow a duplex, triplex, or fourplex where single unit dwelling is permitted, that they allow for higher density housing near transit stations, places of employment, et cetera, that they eliminate or reduce off-street parking requirements to not more than 1 per dwelling unit, that they eliminate impact fees for accessory dwelling units or developments that include multi-dwelling units, or reduce fees by not less than 25%, that they allow not less than 1 internal or detached accessory dwelling unit on a lot, that they allow as a permitted use single-room occupancy developments. Over on page 4, that they eliminate minimum lot sizes or reduce the existing minimum lot size by not less than 25%, that they eliminate certain aesthetic, material, or floor area requirements for multi-unit dwellings or mixed-use developments, or remove not less than half of those requirements, that they allow for the development of tiny houses, that they eliminate setback requirements or reduce existing setback requirements. They increase building height limits for dwelling units not less than 25%, that they allow as multi-unit dwellings or mixed development on all lots where office, retail, or commercial use are primary permitted uses. And finally, that they allow as a permitted use multi-unit dwellings on lots where triplexes or fourplexes are permitted uses. Subsection F on page 5 would just allow that if the city or town already has a regulation, that they shall be considered to have already adopted that strategy. So existing ones wouldn't necessarily count against them. And G provides that if one of these strategies is subsumed by another one, then only one strategy is considered to have been adopted. Subsection H just provides a number of definitions for the terms used in those previous subsections. And then on page 7, just a staff comment there for the committee may wish to consider also adding a definition for an accessory dwelling unit, that they may wish to consider requiring cities and towns to report or publish the regulations to be amended. And certainly, you may wish to consider additional housing strategies. That staff comment then goes on in pages 8 through 11, really, to list some strategies that are found in Utah code. And in looking at those strategies, you would note that they have as well kind of a carrot approach for the use of certain housing development programs, which is not something we see in our current draft. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I would stand for any questions on the bill.
So David, could you remind us where this bill came from?
Mr. Chairman, this, I think, arose from discussions with the two of you as far as some additional bills that you'd like to see for the task force and just some options and ideas to present. So this was kind of a, give us some housing strategies to implement based on the housing discussion from that first meeting and the memorandum that looked at Montana's law. That's where what's in the bill comes from, is based on Montana's law. And so that's, sorry, to give more background, that is where this draft originates.
And so as the Regulatory Reduction Task Force, this seems like we're going in the opposite direction.
Mr. Co-Chair.
Please.
And just a comment, we did talk about this, and one of the things we talked about was, asking communities to come up and put together a plan, and that we'd offer a bill up to have strategies and to try to work on this. And then that was this kind of the stick approach, and then the carrot would be to say, well, let's authorize $100 million and put towards infrastructure. So then if you did these plans, then you'd be able to unlock the key to the infrastructure. Well, what we got through this exercise is a bill that, as the good co-chair said, looks like it's adding more regulations than it's getting rid of. And then we look, and in this biennium, we have $87 million for infrastructure. So we already have the 100 million, and we really waiting for the strategies to come. So I'm not so sure that this is all maybe exactly what we intended. And after going through this exercise, the money's there. So now I think now we need to do is get the word out to our friends in the cities and towns and the counties that this money is available, and maybe help them navigate better to access it, and then have them come up with strategies on their own. Might be the best way.
Clark?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. Hopkinson, it seems like on the menu of choosing 5 from the menu of things they can do, that there are regulatory reduction portions of that. For example, if a community eliminates minimum lot sizes, then that's a reduction in regulation. So is what animates this bill the idea that on the one hand, the state will be putting constraints on what communities can do, but by providing the menu options will allow some flexibility so that each community can then deregulate as it sees fit. Is that a fair characterization of what animates this bill?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Stith, I do think that's kind of the intent there is to require those cities and towns to some extent reduce their regulation or minimize the limits that they are placing on housing development.
Okay, committee, what's your pleasure on this bill?
Mr. Chairman, just a couple thoughts on those funding sources is, I think our friends from the local governments can talk about this, but those SRF dollars at this point, I would venture, I'd be shocked if not all of them, all of those dollars are used for maintenance of existing infrastructure, of water and sewer infrastructure. So I think the concept of having especially water and sewer infrastructure funding available and having a carrot to use that to help bring down the cost of housing, where you don't have to subsidize the housing, you're just helping encourage that development by putting that arterial infrastructure in place, and the private developers still then have lower costs to connect to that arterial infrastructure. I think you might need to name some of those dollars within the SRF programs that would be for new infrastructure. Because right now, again, I think friends from local government would talk about this, that money's needed for kind of regular upkeep of our water and sewer system. And yes, there is going to be a huge injection through that IIJA fund of more water and sewer money right now. But if we want to try to help provide the carrot, at least, that is definitely a source of it. But I think we probably would need to do more than just advertise it, because I think the competition for those SRF dollars will mean that every dollar Wyoming gets will go out the door just to do maintenance and upkeep of systems across the state. If we want, as a committee, to not change state law related to regulations on development and just offer a carrot, that is a tool, but I think we'd have to cordon off a few of those dollars for it. And then I think we'd have to figure out how you qualify for it. So do you want to take something like this bill and say, if you reduce these regulations at the local level, then you can qualify for this pot of money? So that would be, I guess, the concept I would be interested in pursuing at this point.
So the problem I see with that, step one, is that unless there's a major change in our funding, we're not going to have any money to offer any carrots next year or the following year. Because had the governor not vetoed the property tax bill, we would be $125 million in the hole already. And I know that the SBC just passed about $260 million for new construction. Well, there's no money for that, basically, in our supplemental budget. As our budget currently stands, it's the only place of money that we have available for a carrot would be the LSRF.
And Mr. Chairman, I would point to and maybe Hank could talk to a little bit, the IIJA new money that's coming in for water, sewer. And we were talking about this, if you do use SRF money for water and sewer, you can do the overlay of the road and sidewalks. That's a permissible use in that. So that's the only pot that I would think of that's kind of available over the next few years.
And so what you're saying is put some guideposts up for the use of the IIJA monies to make a carrot approach. Portion. Go ahead.
Yeah, so just to jump in on the conversation as it relates to the clean water SRF, right now, by statute, the first funding element is those facilities that are not in non-compliance with the Clean Water Act. The second group is for the underground storage tank program, so we can implement that, and that's how we operate off those funds. And that's also for landfill remediation, and orphan sites are part of that now as well. Then you can get into the third tier, which is then all of the other types of projects based on priority. As far as the infrastructure bill goes, I would just throw out the cautionary note that there's a congressional issue being discussed right now that by the time the IIJA money or grant is used up in 2026, there may not be any federal SRF monies because they've all been tapped with earmarks for special projects. And so that would leave $0 for a state like Wyoming for SRF funds. So that's something we're trying to work through right now on the federal end. But that's just a cautionary note that that money may not be there as much as we think it is today. Not to be a downer.
So committee, thoughts on this bill? All those in favor of pursuing this bill, raise your hand.
A carrot version of it?
Yeah,
Oh,
the cucumber.
Mr.
Go ahead.
Chairman,
Please.
I may have misunderstood what you just said. I thought you were asking who was in favor of pursuing the bill as presented.
That's correct.
Okay, so yes, I'm in favor of this. I think what it does is it encourages deregulation. That's what this task force is about. Now, it does so by imposing constraints on what local governments can do. But I think that's part of what we're here for, because we've got cities that, you know, they need denser housing, but members of the local city council worry that they're not going to get reelected if they vote for denser housing. This would, and lot size, my experience on city council in Rock Springs was that Rock Springs, at the time I was on it, had a 10,000 square foot minimum lot size requirement. And the effect of that was that because contractors need to make money, the only thing they could build were really expensive houses. So there was one development where the city council voted to reduce the lot size to 7,000 square feet. And that made an entire development possible that was relatively affordable for new home buyers. So this minimum lot size is kind of a big deal. And I see that as one of the menu choices there. And yet I think we have communities that are unwilling to take that on their own without some nudge prodding by the state. They're unwilling to do it. So I'm in favor of pursuing this structure of a bill. Thank you.
So my question is, what's the carrot? If we don't have funds to fund it or to prioritize it?
Oh, Mr. Chairman, from my point of view, there's no carrot. We just mandate this and they just do it.
Okay, any other comments?
Mr. Chairman, I think my only thought is, I mean, if we work it, I'm interested in considering what the size requirement is, and if the size, and so I'd want to hear from towns at that like $4,000 inhabitants border, just to understand what their capacity is, and maybe the stair stepping could make more sense in that situation. I do think that there are situations where we could release some of the electoral pressure on our town councilors. Could this be it? I don't know, but might be worth looking at. I'm basically a little wishy-washy on it. That's my little ramble. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, let's see a show of hands. Who would like to pursue this bill? That's 2 votes. So I think at the current time, we'll table this. If there are some more ideas or suggestions on this, we'd be happy to revisit it at our next meeting. If you can bring some mojo to it.
Mr. Chairman, so one thing I would be interested in, so in response to the memo that accompanied this before the bill, talking about grants, so the governor did create a grant accessibility, I don't remember the name of it exactly, like a task force to help towns and counties access grants. I think it'd be worthwhile to put that in statute and create it as a permanent office, not just one that's at the pleasure of our current governor. Because I think it's important that all our towns and counties be able to have the information to access grants, which right now I don't think we really have that capacity in some of our smaller towns and counties.
Yeah, but that's a separate issue, but it's a good thought. Okay, go ahead.
Is there any appetite for, with all due respect for our colleague from Rock Springs and his stick, is there any interest in anybody working a carrot version of this that doesn't mandate communities, but tries to figure out options for what the carrot might be, and then what the incentives to chase after that carrot are?
Yeah, my suggestion is that you bring us a carrot and we'll consider it. Fair enough?
Sure.
Okay. Okay,
Mr. Chairman?
please.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I didn't raise my hand because it seems to me when you look at that list, it's just fraught with people that could interpret it different ways. It goes back to the governing body. At the end of it, we look back at this 2 or 3 years from now, and it'd probably be unworkable. If we're going to really mandate, we ought to narrow it and mandate and say, this is what you're going to do. And I wouldn't be in opposition to that. Certain things that are minimal, rather than give them all these different choices, particularly that one that you looked at for Montana. My goodness, you'd have to hire staff to go through that, and you could, well, anyway, I'm not going to get into that, but if we're going to mandate it, I'd be in favor of mandating, but you got to have a simple set of, I think, mandates that fit. They're not going to fit for Teton County, but that's the way it is. And if you did that, I'd be in favor of something like that, but you're just going to try to get in between a mandate and not a mandate, make it work. It's just not workable. We've known that in different areas of the law we try to play with. You either got to go one way or the other, you try to get in between, and it never works.
Agreed. Okay, any other comments? All right, let's move on. Next.
And Mr. Chairman, the next two bills, 10 and 17, are also bill drafts that are before the Corporations Committee, similar to the one at 24 that the committee looked at earlier, and Ms. Adams will be presenting those.
Okay. Welcome, Ms. Adams.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so this bill draft is 25 LSO 10, working draft 0.5, residential rental properties applicability. So this is a resurrect of 2023 House Bill 216 as requested by the Joint Corporations Committee at its April meeting. And it's currently scheduled for consideration by the committee at its upcoming July 30th to 31st meeting in Evanston. So if you take a look at page 2, this bill draft amends the definition of residential rental unit as used in this article, meaning sections 121, 1201 through 1211. And those statutes generally address the duties of renters and owners, as well as some of the remedies for renters and owners if the other party fails to fulfill their obligations under those statutes. So as amended, residential rental unit means a renter's principal place of business that is rented or leased to the renter for a period of not less than 6 months. There are some staff comments throughout that note some of the changes compared to the 2023 version. So this first staff comment just notes that we replace not less than 6 months with a period of at least 6 months. And then subsection B, starting on line 24, is created to address preemption by the state. So under subsection B, the state of Wyoming preempts for itself the field of regulating owners and renters of residential rental units. The subsection states that this article is intended to apply to all owners and renters of residential rental units and to be the primary remedy for disputes between owners and renters. That staff comment starting on line 8 just explains that we replaced a reference to the exclusive remedy in the 2023 version with a reference to the primary remedy because there's another statute that suggests that there may be other avenues for relief. And also federal discrimination actions would be available to renters. Moving on to newly created subsection C, it provides that no city, town, county, or other political subdivision shall authorize, regulate, or otherwise govern the leasing of residential rental units. And it also provides that those same entities shall not require owners of residential units to register those rental units or pay any registration fee. But nothing in this subsection would be construed to affect land use plans and zoning ordinances. The staff comment at the bottom of page 3 explains that subsections B and C have been revised compared to the 2023 version for consistency in terminology. And also in subsection C, we've removed a reference to regulation of ownership because there were some concerns that that language was too broad and might lead to unintended consequences. And finally, the effective date would be July 1st, 2025. And with that, I would stand for any questions.
So could you explain what the genesis of this bill was?
Mr. Chairman, so the genesis of this year was in joint corporations. We had discussions at the April meeting about housing policies. And I believe there was a constituent who brought this bill draft to the committee. And then the committee requested that it be resurrected. And it is, again, it's a 2023 bill that's been resurrected as requested by the Joint Corporations Committee.
Was the constituent from Laramie?
Mr. Chairman, I believe so.
Imagine that.
Mr. Chairman, the constituent is currently online and has his hand raised if you want to take public comment.
Okay.
Let's hear.
Please bring him in.
Yep, he's coming. Mr. Glass, if you can turn your camera on.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to participate in this meeting via Zoom. My name is Brett Glass, and I'm currently a candidate to sit on the Laramie City Council, but I speak to you today as a private citizen and business owner representing myself. I happen to be on a rare trip out of state. I'm now on the shore of Squam Lake in New Hampshire, joining you through my iPhone, and it's a technological wonder that I can do that. I've been talking to some of the locals here, and they, like folks in Wyoming, value local control. However, they also agree that it makes sense to have consistency and fairness throughout a state, and that cities shouldn't infringe on basic property rights or impose so many layers of regulations that folks can't do business. And this is why I've taken a break from my break to speak to you on and for draft bill 2510. Now, I have direct experience as both a landlord and a tenant with one experiment in local regulation, in rental regulation in Wyoming, and that's the extremely stringent ordinance imposed 2.5 years ago by the city of Laramie. At the time, some of the council members who voted in favor of it seemed to have meant well. Others frankly admitted that they were out to get landlords who they believed to be evil, and still others seemed to go along because they'd always favored bigger government and more bureaucracy. But in any case, whatever the reason, the ordinance has been unequivocally a flop. It's harmed tenants rather than helping them. There have been only 21 complaints in more than 2.5 years related to the ordinance, and the majority of those complaints had nothing to do with an actual rental issue, but rather with a landlord failing to fill out the city's bureaucratic paperwork. The city has raked in about $160,000 in fees, which are passed on to tenants. And while it hasn't been tested in court yet, many believe this to be an illegal tax rather than a fee because the licensee doesn't receive any benefit from it. And the city, what has the city done with the money? Well, it's pretty much just pocketed it. It's not actually using the money to do any good for anyone. Now, in the meantime, several big landlords have pulled their units from the market rather than deal with all the bureaucracy. Others are selling their properties, and trailer parks especially, and now also apartments, to private equity firms, which are known to be bad and unresponsive landlords. So after 30 months, not even half of Laramie's rental units are even licensed or registered with the city. Rentals have jumped dramatically, and there's now a serious shortage of affordable rentals. What's more, the city ordinance, which was copied from one in Corvallis, Oregon, doesn't and can't deal with the most common problems that Laramie renters face. Disputes over charges to security deposits are the #1 problem, but they're civil matters, and under Wyoming law, municipal courts are only criminal courts. So you have to go to small claims court for this. The same is true of evictions, including what's called constructive eviction. Constructive eviction, which is illegal under state law already, happens when a landlord attempts to force a tenant out by making the unit unlivable. This is also, all evictions, including that kind, are also handled by the circuit court at the county courthouse. Finally, the Laramie area's worst rentals, the ones whose safety is really questionable, are not affected by the ordinance because they're outside the city limits in the county. There's no point in passing an ordinance that doesn't address the most problematic cases, and this one doesn't. Now, as I said earlier, I'm all for local control to the extent that it makes sense. But a requirement to have a license to lease property that you own, even if you're leasing it to members of your own family, infringes upon your essential property rights. And having such completely different rules for rentals inside each city is like a city mandating that you drive on the left side of the road inside the city limits. In this case, the basic rights in landlords and tenants are granted by the state, and they should be uniform throughout the state. The rules should change completely when you step over the line between the city and the county, or when you go between cities. So for this reason, I think you'd agree it's both more fair and more sensible to set uniform rules at the state level and let local control happen at the county level through the county courthouse. It's equipped to judge and enforce these things. Now, state law, if you look at the statute, already says that rentals have to be habitable, sanitary, and safe. And this, plus the relevant case law, should set the standards for all rentals everywhere throughout the state. State law should make the enforcement fair and uniform everywhere, and it should limit the numbers of regulation faced by property owners, and be fair to both tenants and landlords. Now, I've always watched our local circuit court at work, and I can say with confidence that it will really do that. In Laramie, that circuit court is a half a block from City Hall, and it's even more accessible than City Hall. Our local county judges don't take any guff from anyone, be it a landlord or a tenant, and they really do take the time to do the math so that the law is applied fairly. I was once challenged as a landlord by a tenant over deductions from a security deposit, and the judge looked over my math and said he thought I should pay the tenant just $5 more to get completely square. So I did that day. That's the level of precision these judges expect. So in conclusion, on and for 25 LSO 10, I strongly recommend that this task force support its passage out of the Joint Interim Corporations Committee as a committee bill for consideration by the legislature. I think it would be an improvement. It would reduce regulation, which is the charter of this task force. And all in all, it would be better for everyone throughout the state. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll stand for questions.
Representative Stitt.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. Glass, what if the bill were narrower and just prohibited landlord registration fees? Would that solve your problem? Or
not in through you, Mr. Chairman, it would not entirely, because some of the other restrictions in that ordinance also cause a lot of problems. They restrict, for example, they require. They put onerous requirements upon any rental that has natural gas appliances. And there's actually a concern. Some of the members of council seem to be opposed to the idea of gas appliances at all, and may be interested in banning them in new rentals or even existing ones. That's a big concern. There are some other things which are also of questionable legality that make it very hard for landlords to even continue to rent. For example, some of the rental units were pulled off the market because even though they had safe means of egress in case of a fire, the ordinance was so specific about what kind of egress you had to have that it would cost tens of thousands of dollars per unit. In some cases even more, to make the units conform. And there was no reason for it because the units were built to code originally and conformed when they were built, and also still are safe. So it's a big concern. I really think that if we have uniform, sane laws at the state level, we shouldn't need additional ones at any city level. And again, we don't want, if you step in Laramie, you can step over the city limits without realizing it because, the next block might be outside the city limits. And it's just not fair to have different rules inside and outside. So I really think it pays to go ahead with with the provisions of this bill pretty much as they stand. I'd be satisfied with it as it stands, although I do have some suggestions if you're looking to improve it.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. Glass, so that natural gas comment kind of piqued my interest on what the concern was. So I opened up the City of Laramie's rental housing habitability checklist, which is what you have to accompany with the form for your $20 per year license. And the only thing I could find was proper ventilation for fuel burning heating appliances exists and meets the building code requirements applicable at the time of installation. Is that the onerous regulation for natural gas appliances? Or is there a different?
Well, there's more. They require you to, if there is a natural gas appliance anywhere in the building, they require you to install carbon monoxide detectors everywhere. They require that you only have a licensed contractor work on anything involved with heating. And that's right now in Laramie, they've also passed a very restrictive ordinance having to do with licensing of contractors. And so you almost can't get something fixed.
So, Mr. Chairman,
you could have 10, yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, so you're saying the $20 fee and a carbon monoxide alarm is an onerous regulation for your rental units?
Well, it's the problem is they have to the alarms have to be everywhere. They have to be maintained. And again, it's the way the ordinance is structured. It seems as if they're against your having natural gas appliances altogether. That's our concern. And again, these remarks were the council had made remarks to that effect. So the concern is they're going in that direction.
Turn on. Thank you for your testimony. Appreciate it.
And Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, one quick question. I understand the rules and regulations about monitoring and all that, but why do you want to put in there the limit of 6 months? That they have to have a minimum of 6 months to be under the definition?
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I think that's just a policy decision for the legislature, and that's what they originally did in 2023, was provide that all these rules would apply and municipalities, et cetera, would be preempted if these rental agreements or these rental units are rented for more than 6 months. But that's entirely a policy decision for the legislature.
Okay, committee, do we have more public comment? Go ahead. Jeremiah.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'm Jeremiah Riemann here on behalf of the Wyoming County Commissioners Association. Just two quick comments here. First off, if you go to Title 18-5201, this is the county planning and zoning statutes. It indicates our primary purpose, if we're going to regulate in this space, is to promote the public health, safety, morals, and general welfare of the county. I think this bill goes in the face of that. And I'll say no county is currently has a policy like this in place, but that's our general requirement. I'd be up here perhaps in a different capacity if the state was preempting this because the state was going to take on this responsibility, but there's nothing in this bill that suggests that. So I just say you need to keep that at the local level. Mr. Chairman, I'm going to take my badge off. I'm going to do that for a reason. My wife and I own a property in the city of Laramie, a rental property. I can show you my checklist. I can show you my license. The city of Laramie, when they went through this process, we identified 3 issues that we had with that particular ordinance. We brought those 3 issues to the city council, to the attorneys, to the city manager, who I know is sitting behind me. And guess what? They addressed every single one of the issues that we had, the concerns that we had, and made that rule a better thing. At this point in time, the rule has cost us $40. That $40 is spread out over 2 years for us to register our property and to just show that we're compliant. We're happy to do that. It's not been a burden for us. That's what, $1.50 a month? We didn't pass that on to our tenants in order to comply with this regulation. And I'm happy to get into the details of the issues that we had, but again, the community responded because we brought substantive issues to them. You know, I look at the natural gas issue. It only says you have to have a carbon monoxide detector there if there is a gas unit, and only on that level where that's at. That's just common sense. It's not a big deal for us. I'm happy to do it. So I just push back in terms of the other testimony as a landlord that had to go through this process that's subject to this particular provision. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Questions for Jeremiah? With or without his badge? Okay. Thank you, Jeremiah. Appreciate it. So welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm Janine Jordan. I'm the city manager in Laramie. This is Micah Richardson. She's a council member in Laramie. And I believe we also have Mayor Harrington on the Zoom call, as well as our city attorney, Bob Southard. He also had commitments in court today, so I'm not quite sure how he's going to manage that, but I understand he may be available if you have questions. I had submitted to your LSO staff a memo to talk a little bit about what we were asked to discuss when invited to attend today. And that was housing in Laramie. So we will touch on the rental regulations, but I wanted to kind of give a quick overview to lead into that, as noted in this memorandum. Laramie's been tracking a severe shortage of workforce housing for many years now. And I bring that up only because I want to impress upon this committee that Laramie is maybe not the same community that you attended college in 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago, as did I. I lived in Laramie for 10 years prior to working for the city, and as many of you enjoyed living in some of the finest student housing Laramie had to provide. So I know we all have our war stories of having been a student in Laramie at the university or at WyoTech, but what I want to tell you is that our housing issue today isn't about student housing and it maybe not being to the standards that we all got to enjoy. Our issue is about workforce housing. We've been tracking a shortage of housing for many years. We do have a housing study. We have done many follow-up studies since 2015 with our original housing study, including a code audit to look at our municipal code. And you may find this of interest because I think it touches on the conversation you've had throughout this day. We audited our municipal code, and the city council over the last 5 years have made dozens of regulatory reductions to the Laramie Municipal Code in order to encourage new housing development, and as much as we're able, the remodel and redevelopment or rehabilitation of existing housing units in Laramie. We have also partnered with private developers to bring in low-income housing using the tax credits that you have talked about, the city donating land oftentimes to that kind of housing. But despite all of this, we are struggling to find and be able to provide what we call missing middle housing, which is housing for middle-income families and workers. As of today, the results of the efforts and work of the City Council, we have 611 new housing units that we've added in the last few years. That sounds like a lot, but it's half of what we needed to have added by 2023. Speaking to you today, we expect to bring another 87 housing units online, and we have 592 home lots that have been preliminary platted and are awaiting final plat to be initiated by the developer. In addition, we have 97 residential lots ready to build on. We just need builders. So if I can use your airspace as an infomercial, we need builders in Laramie. Back to missing middle housing. So workforce is the issue, and the pressures in our housing industry have caused workers to be in direct competition with students, with the families of students. Fortunately, there are families who are able to purchase homes in Laramie and ensure their children live in safe conditions, and that is increasingly a trend. We also have folks, those student families oftentimes are short-term investors in our rental market, but we also have long-term investors in our rental market, which is very common in college communities. So what that has meant is that our workers are directly in competition with all of those folks for housing in Laramie. Our employers in Laramie tell us that recruiting and retaining talent is foremost affected by lack of housing. We have 7,560 rented housing units within the municipal limits. That is more than in Casper and just slightly less than in Cheyenne. So I hope that helps you understand the scope of the issue that the City Council has been dealing with. As our workers have increasingly been able to find quality housing, and remember, a lot of these people are families. 25% of the folks who rent in Laramie are married family couples. 25% of them are 34 plus. These are not students, this is workforce. They have become increasingly vocal as they go out to the rental market, and most of them can't afford to buy. They've been increasingly vocal to tell the City Council that the standards and quality of housing that they're finding are just really unacceptable. So with that in mind, the City Council established minimum habitability standards for rented housing and a tenant landlord complaint resolution option in the 2022 Rental Housing Code that appears to be sort of maybe the target of the legislation that you're looking at today. We arrived at this rental housing code by looking at peer communities around the country. Most of them are college communities, but the unique factor in the economic market that binds those college communities together is that presence of short and long-term investors and absentee owners in the market, because it is a profitable space to own property. Many of the peer communities have that same economic condition. To give you a little bit of perspective on how successful the rental housing code has been so far, we have 1,487 applications we've received. 8 of them have been denied. Most of those 8 denials were for failure to complete the paperwork properly, so really just clerical errors more than anything else. We did have a couple of applications submitted where the landlord conducted the self-assessment that they must perform, the habitability checklist, and they submitted it to us indicating they did not meet the critical habitability elements, and so, of course, the application was denied. It takes about 1 to 2 days from the receipt of application for the city to register and issue a license to the property owner. As you heard from the constituent, we have received 21 complaints. 55 of those have been substantiated, and I can assure you that those complaints are not about paperwork. Those complaints are about substantive issues, notably heating, plumbing, electrical, and smoke detectors being the top 4 cited missing or malfunctioning elements that caused a tenant to complain. The habitability standards, I want to tell you, apply to any dwelling unit that is rented. And the difference is, as a homeowner, I can choose to live in a home that is perhaps unsafe to me or my family or my guests. But when you are renting that home to another person and executing a business function, the understanding of the council was that there was the ability for the council to say there should be some minimum standards of life and safety when you bring someone into that home in exchange for money. I will tell you that the habitability standards are probably the most basic any of us would want for ourselves or our friends, and that is my opinion. These are questions of, is there heat? Is there running water? Does the plumbing function? And is there fire escape from bedrooms? The standards are less onerous and less costly than the International Residential Code, which the City Council could have adopted, could still adopt. And again, landlords are only asked to conduct a self-assessment of their property. We believe this program is impacting living conditions and life safety for the 15,000 people that rent within the city of Laramie, and that the city is fulfilling its core function of protecting life, health, and safety. Again, there are council members here and potentially the city attorney if you have questions for me or for them. Thank you.
Okay, questions? I don't see any. Thank you for the presentation. Did you like to say anything?
She nailed it. I'm good. Thank you.
All right, anyone else like to speak on this?
Mr. Chairman, Bob McLaurin with WHAM. I feel like I'm at the end of a preemption fest here at the end of the day. We talked about a lot of bills today, and as the mayor of Cody said earlier, we want to work with you constructively on these bills. This is a bill we're strongly in opposition to. I don't want to drag it out any more than that, but the city of Laramie, we believe, has done a responsible thing. And we're strongly opposed to this bill and be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, any questions? Okay, anybody else?
Steve Cathy, Mayor of Casper, you get to hear from me one more time. But, I am not going to talk about the rental bills or anything else. I am here to talk about 117 and 135. Basically, 117 says that except as provided, the governing bodies may regulate height of buildings, percentage of lot size, et cetera, et cetera. There are 5 things here which that one says that the cities can regulate. 5 of those are 5 of the 12 that you're telling us we have to change. So that then turns around and takes us down to having to choose 5 out of 7 remaining. So that almost seems like 135 is counterproductive to 117. That's one of my concerns right there. Secondly, if we go to page 3, E, item I, it says that we cannot restrict who may apply for a building permit. None of you really know what my background is. How many of you are willing to allow me to go down and apply for a building permit to build you a house? I think that should not be in there. We need some regulation on who can apply for building permits. There is, in Casper, we have a licensing process to be a contractor, which at one time I was. I have since relinquished that contractor's license. So I could probably build you a house. The other thing, if you then go to page 4 of 117, item 6 on the back page there, says restricts or prohibit the use of natural gas for residential heating or appliances except as reasonably necessary to ensure health, safety, or welfare of city towns pursuant to any building code. Well, we already know that the EPA has tried to claim that natural gas is hazardous. So does that mean then that we have to take out natural gas? If the IBC comes out and says the same thing, do we have to change that? So I would believe that that whole statement should end at restrict or prohibit the use of natural gas for residential heating or appliances and make that a period and leave out the exceptions as it goes forward. Any questions?
Okay, appreciate it.
Thank you very much for your time. Mr. Chairman, representatives of the committee, thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments on this before we, seeing none, we'll close public comment. So committee, let's start off with the important question of, do we want to take this bill up or not? So,
And Mr. Chairman, you're talking about the preemption bill, is that right?
the residential rent properties bill. right? It's 0010. Okay, all those in favor of taking up this bill, raise your hand. All those opposed? Okay, I think we're not going to, we'll give that back to corporations and let them have as much fun with it as they want to. All right.
And then 117.
Where does that leave us, Hank?
Mr. Chairman, there's one last bill draft, and that's 25 LSO 17, and Ms. Adams will also present that one.
All right.
Mr. Chairman, members of the task force, Katie Adams, LSO. So this is 25 LSO 17, working draft 0.5, city, town, and county regulations. So this is another bill draft that the Joint Corporations Committee requested at its April meeting, and it's scheduled to hear this bill at its meeting later this month in Evanston. So as you'll see on the first page, the general purpose of the bill is to specify the authority of cities, towns, and counties to regulate building permits, single-family residences, and natural gas use in residential buildings. So turning to page 2, line 12, section 15.1.601 is amended. So subsection A currently provides that the governing body of any city or town by ordinance may do all of the things that are listed. So regulate and restrict height, number of stories and size of buildings and other structures, percentage of lot that may be occupied, size of yards, courts, and other open spaces, density and population, location and use of buildings, generally for industry, residence, or other purposes. And then also they can establish setback building lines. And so what this bill draft does is it carves out an exception for those items that are specified in subsection E. Turning to page 3, a new subsection E is created to provide that no governing body of any city or town shall do the 6 items that are listed. So we have restrict who may apply for a building permit, charge building permit fees that exceed the reasonably anticipated administrative costs to issue a building permit, require a minimum lot size of more than 7,000 square feet for a single family residence, require a single family residence to have a garage, require a single family residence to have off-street parking for more than 2 vehicles, and then finally restrict or prohibit the use of natural gas for residential heating or appliances, except as reasonably necessary to ensure the health, safety, and welfare of the city or town and its citizens pursuant to any building code. The staff comment on page 4 just explains that there may be additional fees associated with a building permit, and it provides examples from the city of Cheyenne and the city of Casper for how building permit fees are based on the value of the project. And then there may be additional fees as specified in that staff comment. Turning to page 5, section 15.1.611 currently provides that if the regulations made under this article conflict with any statutes or local ordinances or other regulations, then the statutes, ordinances, or regulations that impose the higher standards govern. And this carves out an exception for those items that are listed in 15.1.601E. Turning to the counties, starting on line 9, section 18.5.201 is amended. That section generally talks about the authority that's vested in the Board of County Commissioners. Turning to page 6, a new subsection B is created to provide that no Board of County Commissioners shall do 3 things, and it's pretty much the same, 3 of the same things that are provided that cities or towns can't do. So restrict who may apply for a building permit, charge building permit fees that exceed the reasonably anticipated administrative cost to issue the building permit, and then a parallel provision about restricting natural gas for residential heating or appliances with a similar exception. The staff comment on page 7 notes that the bill draft does not include amendments regarding single-family residences in unincorporated areas of the counties. And it goes on to state that those statutes are complex and may require closer examination by the Joint Corporations Committee if they did want to amend those. For example, there are comprehensive land use plan statutes and then also subdivision of land statutes. And then finally, in that staff comment, there's a reference to 2 memos that were provided to this task force during the 2023 interim. The first is a memo from the Wyoming County Commissioners Association, about zoning and local ordinances. And then the second is a memo from LSO about the scope of permissible legislative regulation of local land use issues. And then finally, the effective date would be July 1st, 2025. And with that, I would stand for any questions.
Okay, questions? So committee, you can probably tell by my slumping in this chair that I'm not excited about this bill either. So I'd like to just, before we dive into it, in hindsight, I know Co-Chair and I talked at lunch and we're going, did we let these bills get discussed today? So, but anyway, feedback from the committee. Would you like to pursue this or have this worked on? Go ahead, Clark.
Mr. Chairman, no, as you might imagine, continuing on what former Senator Bebout mentioned, that he didn't like 135 because it gave a menu option that might be difficult to enforce. This one doesn't give a menu option. This just tells them what they can do and not do. And so I think there are pieces of this that are useful. So the minimum lot sizes, for example, I think could actually have a positive impact on affordable housing. So continuing with the theme, since we've gotten rid of version 135, I think it's worth picking up this one, number 17, and seeing if it's salvageable. That's my take on it.
So the answer, though, is if it's going to be salvageable, someone needs to work the bill a little bit. So do we have any volunteers who want to serve on that working group?
Well, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
I've been around you long enough to know that if you're not excited about a bill, it's not going to go very far. But I think Representative Smith does make a point about certain parts of it. And I really like the natural gas part of it, although I don't know that we need to tell them that we're not going to use natural gas. I mean, I can't believe anybody that would run for any political office in Wyoming, other than maybe one county, would ever say that. So, yeah, I'm not volunteering to be a working group member on this one, but maybe there is a part of it that's salvageable.
Go ahead.
Is corporations taking this up on the 30th as well? So
we could wait and see what they do. And if they take it and work it, then it'll fly. And if not, we can revisit. Does that work for you?
Mr. Chairman, that's what I was going to say. Let's see what they want to do.
Yeah, well, let's do that. All right, now, it's 4:30. What else do we need to do, Hank?
Mr. Chairman, so today, the task force took up a number of bills. You created two working groups, one on the mitigation fee bill draft and the other on the building permit timeline. So you'll have two of those to take up. The next meeting is scheduled for, I believe, October 15th in Cheyenne. And there is ability for another day or a Zoom meeting or something of the sorts. The only thing I would bring up is this morning you talked about the uranium storage issue. I don't know if there was any direction or that you wanted to provide to staff, what next steps to take on that.
So the answer on that is yes. But I think the easiest way to handle that, Hank, is to, the co-chairs will get in touch with you and we'll put something together and see also what the co-chairs of minerals want to do about it. But I think we have a fundamental obligation to pursue that. That could very likely be a lifesaver for, if you look at our projected revenues over the next 15 years and where our coal revenues and severance tax revenues are going to go, it could be a lifeline. So the more we can do on it, we should do it. Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Yep.
Mr. Chairman, I would hope that we would pursue that. I've got scars on my back from talking about issue over the last 30 years, but you know, I was right back then. I think we're right now. I think we ought to take a look at it. So I appreciate you being willing to do that.
Yep, we'll do it. Okay, appreciate it. Anything else? Mike?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to be able to discuss the single stair issue for multifamily dwellings that I think I brought up via email when we asked for topics. I don't know if that's something that I need to request as a draft or maybe just a memo on it for our next meeting.
Tell me what this issue is again.
So for multifamily dwellings above 3 stories, there's a fire code, a US fire code requirement or North American fire code requirement to require 2 stairwells. And that restricts the layout of what a multifamily dwelling can look like, which restricts the number of units. Because if the layout's restricted, it restricts what rooms can actually be bedrooms. And localities that have removed the 2 stairwell requirement and only needed 1 can fit more density within the same multifamily dwelling. So I think it's something that would be worthwhile, especially in places that need hundreds of that or thousands of units in the upcoming years.
So I think if you could get together with LSO, have them kind of craft what the issue is and what the status is, and then submit that to the co-chairs, we'll have a peek at it. Does that work?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, you bet. All right, anything else for the good of the service? If not, thank you everyone for being here and sitting through this lovely summer day. Eli, thank you. And with that, and Mr. President, good to see you. We'll stand adjourned.
See you guys. Bye-bye.